Dogmatika branded Shaddoll Yuebl deck. Let's check this out. If you want to see this deck in action, then be sure to check out the deck showcase video, which I featured just the other day. And without further ado, let's get right into the deck profile. So to start off, we have our basic Yuebl engine. If you're not new to this channel, you've seen this many times. We have 2 copies of Spirit of Yuebl, 1 copy of Yuebl, 1 copy of Terra Incarnate, and 1 copy of the Ultimate Nightmare. I use these ratios for this deck because there's a lot going on in this deck and it really needed the space, so running 3 spirits and multiple copies of either Yuebl or Terra Incarnate just wasn't going to work in this deck because I wanted to free up some space for other things, but this engine definitely works well enough to get your Yuebl on the field and get her doing what she does best. So next up we have 1 copy of Sacrifice Demon Lotus and 1 copy of Infernal Gravesquirmer. Both of these cards are searchable, either by your field spell or by your Nightmare Pain, so having them in the hand is not really necessary. It can be good to have Infernal Gravesquirmer in the hand, definitely, rather than searching him, but most of the time, as far as our Demon Lotus is concerned, we're going to use our normal summon for Ecclesia, so we don't really want to get Demon Lotus in the hand unless we don't have Ecclesia, we've got nothing else to normal summon. Then we get our Lotus and go into our normal Yuebl plays. Otherwise, what we want to see is our Infernal Gravesquirmer, and preferably, we want to search him. So speaking of searching, next up we have 3 copies of the field spell Nightmare Throne. When this card is activated, you can search for either your Sacrifice Lotus, Infernal Gravesquirmer, or even a copy of Yuebl, and you can, if you wish, destroy it. If you destroy Spirit of Yuebl, she will immediately go into the original Yuebl, and of course if you destroy the original Yuebl, she'll go into Terra Incarnate as well. So that is the purpose of the field spell. This is what really starts off our Yuebl combo, which is why we want to run 3 of them. And it starts off Yuebl without using up our normal summon as well. So we've also got 1 copy of Terraforming in order to add that to our hand, and then 2 copies of Nightmare Pain. Generally, you're going to add Nightmare Pain to your hand via the effect of Spirit of Yuebl, but when we do have it, it acts as another way to start up our Yuebl combo by destroying a Yuebl in our hand to summon the next form, or just by adding a Sacrifice Lotus to the hand with its effect, which will then allow you to special summon your Spirit of Yuebl. Next in this deck, we run 1 copy of Mature Chronicle. Mature Chronicle is a fantastic card, especially with the new Yuebl support, such as your Infernal Gravesquirmer. It just really opens up a lot of special summoning, so 1 copy of Mature Chronicle is perfect. This card, again, can be added with Spirit of Yuebl or Nightmare Pain, so you only really want to run 1 of it, since, you know, we got ways to get it, got enough ways to get it, and we'll always have access to it, and it's not so needed that you want to see it in your hand. More likely you want to see everything else in your hand. Yeah, Mature Chronicle, definitely a good card to search, not a good card to start off with. But a good card to have in our opening hand is, of course, Super Polymerization. This card is a must-have for Yuebl, definitely need it. We run 2 copies of Super Poly in this deck. I found that 2 copies is usually enough, but you could up it to 3 if you find that you're not drawing it very often. It is always good to have a Super Poly on board if you have Yuebl as well. Yeah, if you get your Yuebl out, you always want to have Super Poly, so you could up this to 3 and take out something else, but I found that 2 was enough for me. And finally, for the Yuebl engine, we have 1 copy of Eternal Favorite. This acts as our searchable 3rd Super Poly, basically. I mean, we can search Super Poly with Mature Chronicle easily enough, but generally, we're going to get Eternal Favorite out, and that will act as a Super Fusion card for us. This card also allows us to bring back our Yuebls once they're destroyed. So that's it for the Yuebl engine. Again, main thing you want to do, Nightmare Throne, either destroy Yuebl in your deck or get your Infernal Gravesquirmer, or if you don't have Ecclesia, get your Sacrifice Demon Lotus to start off Yuebl that way, and then you just want to have Yuebl on the field with Nightmare Pain and a set Super Poly or Eternal Favorite to just eat up all of your opponent's monsters and get rid of, you know, anything that would cause you trouble. So that's the basics of the Yuebl engine, and that is why it works in this deck. It's all about control, destroying, or not destroying, but removing your opponent's monsters with Super Fusion. Next, let's look at the Dogmatikas. We have the basics. We've got Fleur-de-Lis the Knighted, Dogmatika Maximus, and Ecclesia the Virtuous. We have 1 copy of each of these because 1 copy is all we need. We are always going to search Maximus, or we always want to search Maximus generally, as well as Fleur-de-Lis. We want her in the deck most of the time. She can special summon herself quite easily with her own effect, but normally we're going to summon her with Titanclad the Ash Dragon, so having her in our deck is preferred. And Ecclesia, you can have her in your hand. She will normally be our normal summon, so having multiple copies of her is not a bad thing, but I found that I was running into her a bit too often, even when I ran just 2 copies of Ecclesia, because you don't really want to have Ecclesia in your opening hand, you want to have her in your deck, so you can search her out later. Yeah, and I don't know, I just found that having her in the hand didn't really work out as well. I would rather have other cards that allow me to get to my Nadir Servant. We run 3 copies of Nadir Servant. This card starts off our Dogmatika combo right off the bat. So this will send a monster from our extra deck to the graveyard and add a Dogmatika monster or Fallen of our Baz from our deck or graveyard to the hand with less than or equal attack. So normally with this we're going to send our copy of Garura to the graveyard. Garura will let us draw 1 card, and then we'll add Ecclesia to our hand, or if we've already got Ecclesia, we can add Maximus to the hand, and then normal the Ecclesia and add the Maximus. Maximus's effect will then, yeah, that's how the combo starts. If you don't know the Dogmatika combo, I will talk about that after I do the extra deck, or you can just check out the video to see it in action. Finally, for our Dogmatika cards, we have 2 copies of Dogmatika Punishment, which can be searched with Ecclesia if you already have your Maximus, and is just a generally good card to have for like usually 2 destructions. You know, you send Natis to destroy something, and then Natis's effect will activate destroying something else. So Dogmatika Punishment, definitely a good card and is searchable in this deck. Run it at 2 because it's searchable, with many ways to search it, and we don't really need 3 of them. Finally, for our Dogmatika engine, we have 1 copy of Shaddoll Schism. This card can be added to our hand by sending Ab Cologne to the graveyard with Maximus effect, and has a fantastic effect that allows us to fusion summon a Shaddoll fusion during the main phase, during either player's main phase, which is fantastic, and that then also lets us send a monster our opponent controls to the graveyard if they have a dark or light monster, depending on what monster we want to summon, and what they have also decides what we summon sometimes as well. This mainly gets out our Shaddoll Winder, which just stops our opponent from special summoning, loading up their board, which is fantastic. Speaking of Shaddolls, we now have a small Shaddoll engine as well. This is something that people are actually splashing into their decks nowadays with 1 copy of Shaddoll Fusion. You only need 1 copy because we don't want to see this very often, but going second, Shaddoll Fusion is actually a really good card. See, if our opponent has a monster that was summoned from the extra deck on their field, then you can use monsters from your deck as material, which can create some really cool plays. So what we're normally going to summon with Shaddoll Fusion is actually El Shadow Ab Cologne, who has a cool effect. When it's special summoned, you can negate the effects of 1 face-up card on the field. Not just monsters, but even spells and traps as well, which is fantastic, and all it needs is 2 Shaddoll monsters with different attributes. So in this deck, we run 3 different Shaddoll monsters with 3 different attributes, first being Nel Shaddoll Ariel. Each of these have a good effect when they're sent to the graveyard. Ariel's effect is that you can target up to 3 cards in the graveyards and banish them. This is really good against a lot of meta decks today, particularly Fire Kings. This can be used to get rid of your opponent's Garunics and stuff like that, just anything that might come back or has effects that activate in the graveyard. Works well against, what are they called? Horus deck. It works well against the Horus deck as well, getting rid of their cards from the graveyard, or, you know, zombies, always good to get rid of those. But Nel Shaddoll Ariel is one of the main reasons that people are running Shaddoll Fusion nowadays, because this is just really good and puts a stop to a lot of plays. Next, we have 1 copy of Shaddoll Dragon. Shaddoll Dragon has a decent flip effect as well that allows us to return a card our opponent controls to the hand. I have gotten that off once, which is kind of cool, but the main reason we have it is when this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, Shaddoll Fusion, you can target 1 spell and trap on the field and destroy it. So this is just another way to get rid of our opponent's back row. So when you Shaddoll Fusion, banish 3 from the graveyard, destroy a spell or trap, and then negate a card effect. Or we've also got Ne Shaddoll Genius. Ne Shaddoll Genius has a okay flip effect, but its sent to the graveyard effect is fantastic. When this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can target one effect monster on the field. Neither player can activate that target's effect on the field this turn. So this is a really good way to stop the effects of our opponents, the activated effects of our opponent's monsters, which is fantastic, such as, negates and stuff. You can put a stop to those before starting off your combo, simply by activating Shaddoll Fusion. So this is a really fantastic lineup for the Shaddolls. All we need is Fusion and our opponent to have a extra deck monster, which is, if they don't have an extra deck monster, we probably don't need to do this anyway, so it's fine. Yeah, and that's just fantastic. Now, we only run one copy of Fusion because we can search it, and I'll get to that in a bit. But next, let's take a look at our branded engine. We run a very, very small branded engine in this deck. All we have is one copy of Fallen of our Baz. We never really want to see this card in the hand. We only want him in the deck, so having one copy is perfectly fine. If he's in the hand, though, that's fine as well. We don't need multiple copies. We don't need him in the deck. It's just preferred to have him in the deck. Hardly ever going to summon him, but if you do, he can, of course, fuse with our opponent's monsters, maybe if they have something to fuse with. And then we run 2 copies of Branded Fusion. I found that 2 was enough. Again, you could run this at 3, much like Super Poly, but I found that 2 was enough for me. I was drawing it often enough, and when I didn't draw it, I could always search it. Branded Fusion lets us summon a Branded Fusion monster from our extra deck, or rather a Fusion monster that mentions Fallen of our Baz, using 2 monsters from our hand, deck, or field as Fusion material. So that is a fantastic card. Works well with the Dogmatikas, as this also prevents us from summoning monsters other than Fusion monsters. Yes, but just keep in mind, if you're going for the Dogmatika thing, you want to do this first, get out your Fusion monster, then go into Dogmatikas, because they will stop you from summoning from the extra deck. So just keep that in mind. Same with the Yubel engine, you want to go that first, because you may want to summon Link monsters after that. If you get, the good thing about the Yubel engine is she can get a lot of monsters on the field, especially with Grave Squirmer, and that lets you go into your Masquerena or your Little Knight, which is just, that's the main reason for that. And is fantastic. So you can set up with a good Link Disruption, a good Fusion Disruption, and then have your Dogmatikas come in with a good more Fusion Disruption and just Destruction and stuff. It's fantastic. Now, to add our Branded Fusion, or our Shaddoll Fusion, or even our Nadir Servant, or Dogmatika Punishment, we also have 3 copies of Triple Tactics Thrust. This card is fantastic, especially going second if you don't know what it does. If your opponent has activated a monster effect during this turn, set 1 normal spell or trap directly from your deck, or if your opponent controls a monster, you can add it to your hand instead. Now, the set card cannot be activated this turn, but if you add it to your hand, which generally we'll be doing, this is a going second card, then you can activate it that turn straight from your hand. If you find that you get like ashed or something and you want to activate this card on your first turn, your opponent doesn't have any monsters, you can set your Dogmatika Punishment or your Infinite Impermanence just to set that up for your opponent's turn to get rid of one of their cards. But this is a fantastic card. Another card you could add is actually Terraforming. So this card, if our opponent has a monster, they activate a monster effect, you can get off any of our engines. We can get our Yubel engine with Terraforming, we can get our Dogmatika engine with Nadir Servant, we can get Shaddoll engine with Shaddoll Fusion, and of course the Branded engine by adding Branded Fusion. This is a fantastic card in this deck, especially if you're going second. This is normally a going first deck, but you never know. Going second, fantastic card. Now to wrap up, we just have 2 copies of Pot of Desires. I tried running it at 3, found that 2 was better. You only really need 1 of them ever in a duel, so 2 is fine. This can also be searched with Triple Tactics Thrust if you really need. That is kind of hard to say. Triple Tactics Thrust. Difficult word, try it yourself. Anyway, Pot of Desires, this works well with Yubel, of course, because Mature Chronicle can get back our banished cards even if they're face down, so that's fantastic. And it lets us draw 2 cards, great search card, and 2 copies of Infinite Impermanence. Again, 3 is good if you want to have 3 of this, but Triple Tactics Thrust just adds it anyway if we need that, so I decided to keep it at 2. 2 was fine, 2 works for me, I get it often enough, and yeah, it's just a good card to have. Now to wrap up, we have our extra deck. So first off, we have 2 copies of Yubel, the Loving Defender Forever, which is apparently going to be your English name, which I don't really like, but hey, what are you going to do? This is the best Super Fusion target in the game, eats all of our opponent's effect monsters, fantastic card, need 2 of them. You could run it at 1, but I find that 2 is always better, just for safekeeping. 1 copy of Garura Wings of Resonant Life. This card, when sent to the graveyard, lets us draw one card. He also can be a decent summon with Super Fusion, depending on what our opponent is running, but he mainly lets us draw a card and search for Ecclesia when we use our Nadir Servant. Next up, we have our Shaddolls. We have El Shaddoll App Cologne, which is mainly here to send to the graveyard with Maximus's effect. Then when it's sent to the graveyard, it adds a Shaddoll card to our hand, which could be our Shaddoll Fusion, but most likely we're going to get our Shaddoll Schism. That's the end of our Dogmatika combo there. We have one copy of El Shaddoll Construct to summon with Schism, and one copy of El Shaddoll Winder for the same reason. Construct also has a cool effect that you can send a Shaddoll monster from your deck to the graveyard, which gets off those effects, either preventing activation, banishing 3 from the graveyard, or destroying a spell or trap, depending on what's needed. That is the sort of situation in which you would summon Construct, but also if our opponent has light monsters, you might want to summon Construct with Schism to send one of their light monsters to the graveyard. But normally we're going to go for El Shaddoll Winder, who makes it so players can only special summon once per turn, which really heavily shuts down a lot of decks if they don't immediately get rid of this. There's not a lot that they can do. It's kind of insane and really dangerous, and we can summon it during our opponent's turn with Schism. Next up, we have our branded fusions. We have Titanclad the Ash Dragon. This is the other card that we're normally going to send with the effect of Maximus, because when this card is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon, during the end phase, you can special summon your Fleur-de-Lis the Knighted or just one of your Dogmatika monsters. Mainly going to go for Fleur, but yeah, that's just a really good way to get our Fleur and just finish off our Dogmatika combo with Maximus. The other thing you can do is send him to the graveyard via the effect of Ice Jade, of Mirror Blade the Ice Jade Dragon, to again get that effect off. But next up for our branded dragons, we have Yubel the Searing Dragon. This is the main one that we're going to summon off of branded fusion. His targets are a dark monster plus Fallen of Albaz. You may want to side in more branded fusions as well, depending on what our opponent has, just keep that in mind. But this is the main one. The good thing about this is that with branded fusion, you can also actually send our Infernal Grave Squirmer from the deck to the graveyard, which can then use his effect to bring a Yubel back from the graveyard. I've actually used this quite a bit, even special summon from the hand too. I've used this effect quite a lot, and it works really well. So if you have Yubel in your graveyard, either Yubel or Spirit of Yubel in your hand, and Branded Fusion, you can use Branded Fusion, send Fallen of Albaz and Infernal Grave Squirmer, special summon Yubelian, and then you use Yubelian's effect to discard the Yubel in your hand, and special summon Fuse Yubelian and Fallen of Albaz back into the deck to summon Mirror Jade the Iceblade Dragon. This puts Yubel in your graveyard, which you can then use your Infernal Grave Squirmer to special summon her, and we end on a Yubel and a Mirror Jade. Fantastic field. Mirror Jade is a very powerful card, great disruption, yeah, and that's just really good, really good. Finally, for our fusions, we have 2 copies of Elder Entity Natis. If you're playing Dogmatikas, you gotta have Natis. If you're not doing it, Naxian looking at you, then you're doing it wrong, so gotta have 2 copies of Natis, destroys anything when she's sent to the graveyard, fantastic card. For our Link monsters, we have 1 copy of Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. This is sort of like how Kaiju gets rid of one of our opponent's monsters by linking it, which is great. 1 copy of Nightmare Unicorn, shuffle stuff back into the deck, fantastic, easy way to get rid of stuff without destruction. 1 copy of SP Little Knight, who banishes cards, great, love that, 10 out of 10, and 1 copy of IP Masquerena, so we can do all of that during our opponent's turn and provide a bit of protection for our monsters. So that is all for this deck, Dogmatika Shaddoll branded Yuebl. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know any changes you would make to the deck, tips and tricks that you have noticed playing this deck. And again, if you want to check this deck in action, click the card above to see that video that I posted just a couple days ago showing this deck off. It is a lot of fun, probably one of my favorite Yuebl decks. But next up is Unchained, which is, I would say, even better, though this is kind of fantastic. Great for disruption and destruction. Absolutely love it. It's really good at doing what Yuebl does best, which is just disrupt, remove, interrupt. I don't know. But anyway, thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. My name has been Senkara, and until next time,